All right. Thanks for coming, y'all. My name is Kirk.Gray. I'm here to talk a little bit about how to help your manager help you succeed. So, quick about me. I've been doing the software thing for 17 years, which is depressing because now I'm 40. 6 years I've been doing management. So I work at McGraw-Hill. I'm a recently minted vice president of engineering, so that was cool this week. Surprise. So crazy week. But anyway, so I'm an ed tech fanatic. I've been working in ed tech most of my career. I love it. I love the fact that when I get done at the end of the day, hopefully I helped a teacher teach or a kid learn. So I've been at like Blackboard, Pearson, worked in student information systems. It's really great. If you want to talk about it, please come find me after. And I'm a happy husband and dad. That's my fam. Big picture, so I'm glad I included. So why this talk? So I think when I was younger, I went to a lot of conferences, and you walk away, and like this will date me, but you're like, ooh, now I know how to process XML using Java, right? But you didn't learn a lot of really important stuff that you get a little older, and you've like been doing this for a while, and you're like, man, I had to figure that out like the really hard way, and it took me like 10 years, and it could have taken me like 2 years if I had done it a little more intentionally. And you get one career, right? Like I'm halfway through my career now pretty much, which is crazy to me. And it happened really quickly. To remind people that you are your biggest advocate, right? So not just, like, oh, I had a manager that really took care of me. Like the one who cares the most about you and you moving up and you succeeding is you. And so it's really important to not just get really good at a language or a framework or a product, but to be really good at you having a great career, to help you hold your manager accountable, right? Like I have to be held accountable to do my job for you, just like I hold you, the engineers that work for me accountable. So it's only fair that you have some tools to do that. It's directed at engineers. That's what I know best, but I think most of this applies to pretty much anybody. I think I left a lot of jobs too soon in my career because I didn't know how to like fix a situation or course correct or really like get the most out of that job, and I probably left a lot of learning on the table. I probably left a lot of hard knock type schooling on the table because it's easier to just go somewhere else, right? You get a little raise and you get a clean slate. Cool, my next boss might be way better, or like they have better Macs and I'm tired of Windows, right? And so this is really about like when you're at your job, like make it awesome, right? Quick agenda. So we're talking about some theories I have about careers in general. Talk about self-awareness and introspection and the role that plays in your career. Talk about the future, like what does the future mean to you and how can you influence it? One-on-ones, we're gonna spend a lot of time talking about one-on-ones, and then how to manage up, right? How to make your boss a better boss for you, and then where mentors come in, because I think that's sometimes pretty important, and there's not a lot of literature about like how to get mentored. So, why do people quit? Like, why was the last reason somebody quit here? Right.
Fairly underpaid.
Okay, that's also a good reason. So a lot of literature says it's your manager. A lot of it says. And it's not just like a personal thing, right? It's your manager might be the greatest person in the world. You want to go have beers with them and you invite them over for barbecues, but they don't advance your career, right? They don't challenge you. They don't ask you how you want to be challenged. Like anyone here hiring manager right now? It's pretty hard to hire people, right? And like, when you get an opening, generally you're going to pay like 30% more for the person that just walked out the door who starts from zero, and it takes 6 months. So, but as an engineer, like you also have to think about, will I be here forever, right? Like we have to be honest with ourselves and with our bosses about like what we're doing here, right? Like the company is a waypoint on your road. So how do we like make it the best waypoint possible? So this is crazy. So when I started in 2001, this was probably more like 8 or 10 years. But I would say Denver's probably somewhere in the middle up there of like average tenure. San Francisco's crazy, right? Like you just walk outside and you're like, I want a job, and like you've got a new seat like that afternoon. But we're in the middle, right? It's like you got 36 months at your company max, right? On that, like, and that's probably generous, frankly. Why so short, right? Like I think that there's this is a cool quote, right? And I worked at a company that really had this as a big mantra. It's like you overestimate what you can do in a year, and you underestimate what you can do in 10. So how do we reconcile 10 and 3.5, right? Or 3 or whatever it is. I would say that, this is really true. When I start a job, like after a year, I still have no idea what the hell I'm doing, really. You're still trying to figure it out. You're figuring out the people. You've just really gotten a handle on all that crazy code that somebody else wrote that you're managing, right? You just figured out like that your boss really hates it when you schedule meetings on Thursday, and like, wow, you've been scheduling meetings on Thursday the whole year and they really didn't want to meet with you that day. All kinds of weird stuff, right? And so if you leave in like a year, you've thrown away that whole year. You didn't really get much done. I mean, you can start being productive in code, I guess, but you don't have that context. So how do we reconcile that, right? I mean, it's difficult. So that's what this is all about. So I guess we'll start with introspection, self-awareness. I think this is something that I got schooled on way late. Hopefully you're all like way better than me. But so there's a lot of things you would need to know about yourself before you can really tackle a lot of these things about your workplace and about your relationships and about your abilities, is like understanding how you work, how you learn, where you thrive, right? So are you an introvert or an extrovert? Who here identifies as an introvert? That's pretty good, yeah. And I think, like we have these personality tests. Does anyone take personality tests at work? And then like, anybody do that? Did anybody actually use it? Like, is there any follow-up? Like you took it and then like you had a meeting with your team and you like went bowling and you talked about how you're an extrovert or something? So that's a bummer, right? Like they spend money on that, and you spend time taking these tests, and then like nobody actually does anything with it. You don't change how you behave at all, and that's lame, right? What about your boss? Does anybody know confidently, like, is your boss an extrovert or an introvert? Like, could you say like 100% you know?
You just raised it.
Yeah, not everybody does, right? Because it's not like you can't just be like, oh, that guy's loud at parties, so he must be an extrovert, right? So it's really important to like understand what the difference is and what it means, and how it influences your relationships, right? So yeah, there's a lot of ways you can sort of do this. They have all the Myers-Briggs. Everybody here has probably taken Myers-Briggs, and there's like DISC, which I took once, and again, like I don't even remember what the results were because it was like in one ear out the other. StrengthsFinder is another one, like McGraw-Hill Education where I work does that, and there's theoretically a program around it. We're still waiting to figure out what that looks like. But these things are for you, right? If you really take it for you and not for like the company trying to put you in buckets, it's kind of interesting because you can be like, oh, okay, I am an INTJ, and so that means I, am really good at this, and so maybe I can align myself with other people who get me or are complementary to me. I can understand using that sort of frame when I look at what happened in a job last year, 5 years ago. I can be like, oh, I get why that was a total fail. Or I see something that I did that was really successful. Maybe this helps me understand like what about that situation and me made that work, because now I can look for that, right? I can try to find places where I'm going to really succeed. So yeah, I think introspection is hard. It's hard to like think about how something went wrong. I mean, it's really easy to like celebrate success, and like so that's why I'm a little weird on StrengthsFinder, because it's like figure out what you're good at and do a lot more of that, right? But that doesn't always work, because like if you really have like fundamental issues with like how you make software and you work in software, like doing more of the thing that didn't work, maybe not that great. So yeah, think about like what went right and wrong at your last job. So instead of just switching and like starting over and doing everything that you did again, which is certainly something that I did over and over again earlier in my career, like take some time to actually say like that 2 weeks or 3 weeks, yeah, you can like finish your projects at work and say goodbye to your friends, but you can also be thinking about like, how did this really go, right? Like what could I have done better? Spend time talking to people as you're leaving, right? And saying like, hey, honestly, now that I'm leaving, you can be as candid as hell. How did I do? Like, how did this really work? Would you work with me again? Why? Why not, right? But you can also go as low as like, how did that last meeting go, right? I learned a lot from a boss I had at Pearson who I would go to a meeting and I would try to have this point, right? And I had like one trick, which was like, I see wall, run through wall, right? And so everyone would leave and they'd be like, okay, cool, we'll do your thing, but they all hate you now. And so I'd be like, yay, they're doing my thing, right? And it was a total fail, right? And to me, the only goal was like, get people to change their mind. And so he really was like, let me show you what I do after every meeting, like a big meeting where I'm sort of running it or I have something that I wanted to accomplish, stop and be like, how did that really go? Like, when I looked around the room, did people look like they wanted to stab me, or were they like nodding their head, right? Like, and then I was like, so I started going to meetings and I was like, I felt like such an ass for so long, but it was good, right? For a while it's painful. Then you're like, okay, yeah, that was horrible. Why, you should have pulled me aside a long time ago. But I mean, the only way you get better is to really stop and think about it. You can be your worst critic. Other people sometimes are afraid to really tell you, like, hey man, that thing you're doing, not cool, right? It's really hard for somebody else to say that. But if you're open with yourself and like, I'm not perfect, but I'm really dedicated to getting better, you can give yourself that feedback and really do something with it like tomorrow, right? The feedback loop there can be like very, very small. Yeah, so don't beat yourself up, but just get better, right? Like I learn lots of new things every day, and I've been doing this for a while. And if I didn't stop and think, I'd hate to think like pretty soon 17 more years will pass and I'll still be like the same guy, and that's depressing, right? So yeah, like locus of control is really interesting. This is like the best book. Has anybody ever read this book? By any chance? So this book is about, it's sort of like one of those novel type things, like 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, if anyone's read that. It's pretty short, it's like 150 pages, but it's really about like people who have things happen to them and then blame. And when you read it, you're like, oh, I'm not that person. Like when you read the description, right? And then you actually read the book, you're like, oh crap, I'm that person. I'm so that person. And so like, overnight, like the way you look at how you approach things and how you think about like what is happening and what you really can do and change, really like narrows your focus into things that are important, right? I'm not gonna change that person who has crazy ideas about how we should do things, but I can change like the way I approach them. I can change the people who maybe I needed to build consensus with other people instead of just like saying, oh, we can't do this because that guy's a jerk. Or she's never gonna listen to me because she thinks she's so smart, right? That's what this book's all about. And it's just really sort of provides clarity around like how not to be a victim and how not to blame, but really to stop and be like, what could I own from that situation, right? And if I actually had one person that worked for me who read it and they're like, yeah, I didn't really get it. Like I feel like none of it really applied to me. And I was like, okay, cool. I'm gonna schedule another meeting to talk about that. But most people who read it are like, oh, that was really great. I read it and I gave it to my wife, or I gave it to my girlfriend and they read it, and she's a teacher and she thought about how she behaved in the classroom. So anyway, just tip. Yeah, so now that you know sort of about you a little bit, like what do you want to do? How are you gonna get there? So what track do you want to be on? Like, do people here, so like everyone who's ever worked for me is like, I want to be an architect. That's like the thing you say, right? And then you're like, why? And they're like, because architect is better than developer, but you don't have to manage, right? But anyway, whatever it is it engineer, is it manager, is it architect? Like, you should know, and you should know why, right? Like, really understand why. Like, what about that job excites you, right? Is it because, like, you love to work with people and, harness their potential? Is it because you just love going deep on the craziest problem? So understand what track you want to be on, I think, and really be able to discuss sort of in depth with your manager, like, why is that? Understand what tracks are available to you, right? So at your company, some places don't have architecture, but it's part of management, or it's part of engineering, or, management here doesn't look that interesting, or we're really flat, so we don't have management, right? So being realistic about not just what you want to do, but like what you could do. And then, what are the success criteria? So like, do you know someone who's doing that? Do you think is doing a good job? Talk to those people. Be like, hey, I think you really did a great job on designing the whiz-bang machine. What really went into that? Would you mind like going to lunch with me and just talking about like a day in the life of you and like how you think you succeed and what makes this job really interesting here? Because it may turn out that you're like, whoa, that job sounds terrible. And then all of a sudden you've changed your mind. Or, at least now oh, these are the things I need to get better at. These are the things that, I'm already really strong on, and I could apply that. And then I think, how many people here have like a clear like ladder or leveling guide at their company? Like, okay. So it's McGraw-Hill Education is a big company. They've acquired a bunch of other companies over the years. So like what it means to be a senior engineer somewhere is like completely different from what it means somewhere else. And nobody really knows like what their actual expectations are. So like, how can I as a manager hold you accountable for doing something if we don't agree on what it is you're doing? That's weird, right? People like Camille Fournier at Rent the Runway has published one that she did a few years back. Patreon has a really good one. But like, check those out, right? And hey, be like, hey boss, could we make one of these? If not for the whole company, like, can we at least make one for me, like in this job? We recently did this at McGraw-Hill, and you know, people were like, wow, this is amazing. And I was like, that's so sad that this should be amazing. But yay, I'm glad you're excited. And so, you know, like understanding really like today, here's what I'm doing. Tomorrow, here's what I need to do to get to that place that I want to go is it's like so one-on-one, but it's not always the case. So demand that, right? If your manager can't tell you that, they need to go figure it out and then come back and tell you. So yeah, and you know, as I said, there's not always necessarily a thing at your company where it's like, I want to be a lead engineer, and there is a lead engineer opening for me, right? Or I know someone that's going to quit in 6 months, and so in 6 months I'll be ready. It doesn't work like that, right? And so you have to find out, how do I stretch myself? Like knowing where I want to go, how do I stretch myself? How do I prove that I'm ready? You know, and so you have to get really creative with that, right? It may be that there's a project that is struggling, and you say, you know what, wouldn't it be cool if I could just offer a little bit of expertise? You could give me 25% allocation to that project. Or there's some like pet project of yours that you just are like pissed off because the build sucks. And you're gonna be the one to fix the build, right? And you're just gonna do it. And you're gonna say, and that's cool, but the problem is sometimes people do that and then their boss is like, oh, we actually had another team working on that and we spent $1 million on that. And you're like, oh, so you don't want my new build thing? And I've had that happen before. So like communicate, right? And try to make sure that your goals, like your personal goals, align to the company needs, because that's the fastest way to succeed, right? Is like, I'm solving a problem, I'm demonstrating both that I can learn and that I can, you know, achieve and I can grow, but I'm also making your life a lot easier because you know that's a problem too. We both agree that this was a thing worth doing. So, now you're ready for a promotion, yay! If you think you're ready for a promotion, it doesn't necessarily matter because that's like a two-way street, right? It's like if you're selling a car and you can't understand why no one will pay $20,000 for it, right? Because you think it's worth $20,000. There has to be like the other person who agrees to take part in the transaction. Promotions are kind of the same. The reality is you have to like do the job that you want to get promoted to sometimes, especially at a bigger company. It's just the way it is, right? So like some people are like, I'm out of here because they're having me do all this stuff and I'm not getting paid for it. But actually that's really great because they trust you to do all that stuff, right? So you've actually like done all the hard work and now you just need to like be patient. And obviously there comes a time when you're like, all right, I've been doing this job for like 3 years and I'm still like technically delivering mail, but like you have me like doing DevOps for the whole company. Can we like figure that out? But usually that's not the case, right? Like people want to reward people that are like stepping up, right? And they'll go out of their way to figure out how to make that work. So yeah, and then the other cool thing is like for your boss to get promoted, to open up a slot, like they need to have somebody to promote. So a lot of time when you like, feel that pain of like I'm doing the next job, like if nobody moves up, nobody can move up, and vice versa, right? It's like, so it's kind of funny. So you just have to keep in mind that like your boss really wants to be able to promote you because maybe your boss can't go to director because they'd like have to get this project done or something like that. It happens, as crazy as it seems. So yeah, be comfortable working outside your job boundaries, right? Or like recreating your job boundaries, but accept that it might be unofficial for a while. So one-on-ones. How many people have had managers who look at one-on-ones like that? Anyone ever? You don't have to raise your hands in case your boss is here. So this is like definitely a thing, right? Where people have one-on-ones, but it's because that like somebody told them they had to have one-on-ones, and so they're like, fine, I will have the one-on-ones. Just watch me, right? And they're awful. So how many people do have one-on-ones like on a regular cadence? Yay, that's so much better than recently. How many people have good one-on-ones? Do you feel like the one-on-one is your meeting or your boss's meeting? Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people go to one-on-ones and it's like a 15-minute status torture meeting, and you do it like right after your scrum when you just gave status, and you're like, this is the same thing I just said, and they're like, cool, we've had our one-on-one, good talk, right? So like, don't let that happen. I think one of the weird things about one-on-ones is that if you go and read on the Googles about one-on-ones, like 98% of it is like manager having one-on-one, and there's like 2% of like engineer or not like person having the one-on-one for them. That's weird, right? Because it's like two people meeting, so it should be 50-50, right? So it's your meeting. Always remember that, right? That's sort of the frame for this discussion here. Yeah, it's not a status check. It is not a status check. It is how you find out about things that you might not otherwise know. Like, we're doing this project that seems super crazy. Why are we doing that, right? And you can assume the worst, or you could like ask your boss, and your boss will be like, oh, because this competitor released this thing and we have to do it. And I think bosses have a tendency to do the poop umbrella thing, right? Where they feel like they're doing you a service by like hiding the crazy from you. But sometimes that's actually a complete disservice, because then people lose all this context, right? And so this is one of the ways you get context, because you can have frank discussions one-on-one about like, and your boss might be like, you're right, it is a little cray, but here's why we're gonna do it, and we're gonna make it a plus for all of us, right? Because somebody's gonna see that we finished it and we got it done, and they're like, thank you for doing that crazy thing. So it's better to at least succeed and understand what you're doing, what's the context. It's a really good time to provide feedback to your manager. So we'll talk about performance reviews a little bit, but like managers really like it when they get feedback. And if they don't, like bad. I'm like, I beg people to give me feedback, and they're like, oh, you're doing great. And I'm like, that can't possibly be true, right? There has to be like at least 20 things that I did wrong this last week, and I probably did 2 of them to you. So like, please tell me, right? And it's a really good forum, I think, to like build the trust, because that's how building that sort of like back and forth honesty, it happens there, right? It's not gonna happen in a team meeting. You're not gonna be like, with your team, be like, boss, the way you handled that thing was terrible. Like, you wouldn't say that in front of 8 people, but you could probably actually say that candidly once you've built that relationship with your boss in a one-on-one. So use that time for that, because that makes them better. And then all of a sudden you like your boss more because they're doing stuff that you think they should do more. And then reflect on the last weeks, right? So what went well? Like, it's good to get some like pats on the back, but it's also good to be like, hey, you remember that meeting where you were like trying to run through people instead of like getting them to agree? And I think one of the cool things is like sort of that I've done with some people is like role playing through a situation, right? Like, how could we have done that better, right? So like, I was in a situation, we hit an inflection point. I did thing A. Thing A was clearly not the right thing. Would you want to walk through with me like how we could have done thing B or not thing A, right? Like, I think that's a really good way to use the time, because I think, right, it's concrete learning based on a situation. It's not like this abstract, like, here's how to be a good engineer, I have my playbook, right? It's like, hey, let's talk about a thing that actually happened yesterday, because it's so fresh in everybody's mind, right? So yeah, and I think, that when you do those sort of things, this meeting becomes pretty valuable, and it stops being this thing that you are like, oh, I guess it's the other week because we do this every other week, and last week was so much better. Which is how it's felt for some one-on-ones where I'm like, maybe we could do this monthly. Like, as a manager, like, I want people to be like, could we do this weekly? Because I want it to be so valuable for me and for them that like we're really super excited about doing this more, because this is how we get better at our jobs, right? And how we end up delivering more software and success, right? Okay, it's your meeting. Make an agenda, right? Like, have a plan. I think one of the things that I do right now, I do 17 one-on-ones per month, or 17 people. And some of those are like weekly, and some of those are bi-weekly, a few are monthly. So it's like really hard for me to have time to prepare. But if you tell me, hey Kirk, next time we talk, I want to talk about this, like, I'll actually go and do the legwork, right? Because I know that it's important to you. Otherwise, I'm probably going to show up with some stuff that I have, like based on the goals we've set, and it's going to be kind of boilerplate. But it doesn't have to be. It can be whatever you want it to be. So yeah, so make your manager do their homework if you want them to, and the earlier the better. And so yeah, performance reviews. How many people have the annual performance review thing? How many people think it's awesome? Yeah, it's not, right? But it has to be done for a variety, especially at big companies, of reasons, legal and otherwise. But it doesn't have to be the worst thing ever, right? So like when I do performance reviews, my goal is to not actually have to write anything. It is a very much copy and paste exercise because I'm taking notes the whole way because we're having all these discussions in the moment. And I can actually go back to those notes and be like, Corey grew so much this year, and I'm like feeling really good and have tons of evidence based on like actual notes and things we did to say when I put the 5 down, it's not just like a corporate game. It's like, no, that was legit. Like he did great this year. And everything that we talked about we were gonna do, we did it. Yeah, and that makes me feel good too, right? Because my job isn't just to like get shit done, it's to like have people get better, right? And so, you know, going back, like understanding what your goals are. So, you know, the performance review is full of the like, you get the goal from the top and then they push it down and you have to like squeeze your goal into the like, the shape of their goal. And so what I generally do is try really hard at that, but at some point, you just can't make it work, so you go through the motions. Maybe you set up a second set of goals that are like your personal goals. Like this might not actually show up anywhere in the company thing, but like let's actually track it and let's really like follow up on it as we go. So that if I put together like, you know, Google does what like promotion dossiers, but everyone has to do something like that. Like I could really say like, well, and there's also these goals that we've been tracking off to the side. And you know, this person's just been killing it, and here's how they did it, and here's the output, and how it helped the company, and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I mean, I think if you do those one-on-ones right, software is cool because the feedback loops can be like as tight as you want them. So there's like, when it's done wrong, there's like the yearly thing, right? We go off in a room in February or whatever, and we write some things in Workday or whatever it is, and then we come back in a year and we're like, oh, everything changed, so none of these things mean anything, but I'll give you a 4. You know, and so that's like the absolute worst. But then you can get into like, oh, let's do quarterly check-ins, right? To say, how is it really going? Or we could do, you can get down to the one-on-one, but really like you can actually go down to like the pull request, right? I mean, it's cool. Like you can actually make it all build up so that at the end, like everything was pointed in the direction you wanted to point it at, right? It's all meaningful. And you have the chance to apply, like when I review that piece of code, I'm gonna go back and look at like, what are your goals, right? And if your goals were like using design patterns better, like I can apply that to a pull request review today, right? And that's awesome. And then we can talk about like in 2 weeks, like did you do more stuff like that? How did it feel? Did it work? Like, do you feel like you're more productive? Review should be boring.
You mentioned they have to be done for legal reasons. I was just wondering why that I hadn't heard about.
Oh, like corporately, you know, like you have all the silly rules, like I have to track your performance. So if you don't get a raise, I have to have like evidence of why you didn't get a raise in case you're litigious. It's silly,
Oh, okay.
but like in big companies, this is a thing. Yes.
Worry about that.
Yeah, I would hope that like early stage startup isn't like playing those games, because what would I sue you for anyway? But like, you know, at a big company, it's a thing that people do, and so sometimes you just have to play the game. But yeah, anyway, performance review should be boring. That process should be boring and completely unsurprising. No one should ever be surprised by that if we're doing our job right as a manager. So yeah, like when you figure out those goals, it's like really, again, what are your goals? What are the company goals? What's the overlap? And there's this like, you know, in the middle, this great thing where everybody wins, right? The manager wins, the employee wins, the company wins, yay, right? That's where all the good things come from. That's where promotions happen. That's where like people get bonuses because they did a really important thing. And just a quick note about accountability, right? Again, you have to know your job to be held accountable. And managers are no different, right? Like there's this myth that like once you become a manager, you like don't actually do anything and you're just like marionette strings and no one actually knows what you do. But like I should absolutely have the same sort of clear expectations as everybody else. And you should be able to ask me, what are you supposed to do in this leveling guide? And I should be able to tell you, right? I shouldn't be like, well, I'm supposed to have one-on-ones with you. I mean, like, but I've been places where that's the case, right? Like they're like, I don't know, I guess I just manage. I like manage what y'all do, right? And that's not that cool because, you know, in order to make it a really positive relationship, you can help me achieve my goals too, right? And everybody's going to win that way. So yeah, demand clarity. Remember those leveling guides. If you don't have one, go ask for one. There's lots of samples that are like totally good enough to start with on the internet today. I tried to edit like the combination of like Rent the Runway and Patreons, and I ended up adding maybe like 4 lines and taking out 2 or something because I was like, yeah, that's it, right? That's perfect. So somebody really smart already did that work. Thank you. Use it. All right, so managing up. This is kind of how that feels sometimes too. I thought this was pretty good. Managing up is hard because like there are some relationships where you don't feel like you can tell your boss how to be your boss. That like you're inverting the way, especially when I grew up in DC and worked for a bunch of like contractors who like were run by military a lot of the time. And so it was very hard to have people be managed up when they're like, top down, right? Like, I talk to you, you go do, you come back, let me know when it's done, right? I think that's very different here culturally, in Denver specifically, and I think that it's also 17 years since that was going on. So, you know, in order to manage up though, you have to understand your company's business, right? Because if you're like, hey boss, I really want you to do less of that thing, because I just don't get it, but it's like, that's their whole job because the company needs that, that's gonna be a weird conversation, right? So understand your company's business. Know your manager's priorities and goals, right? Like understand how they are measured at the end of the year, right? Because you can help them and they can help you. Anticipate the needs. So there's some like pattern recognition. This gets back to that thing where like when you work for a year at a place, it's really hard to have like mastered that, where like the boss just said something to me and I don't know what the hell they were talking about. I had a boss who like if they said it to you once, you could safely ignore it. If they said it to you twice, you'd be like, I should go look those words up. And if they say it to you 3 times, you're like, shit, I better go do that. And so like it takes a while to get that feel, right? You know, it's that pattern recognition and sort of just relationship building that allows you to do this successfully. So some of the things that help me, asking me how I want to receive information, right? Like some people really love reading emails and some people just want a quick chat on the phone, right? So understanding, is it real time? Is it asynchronous? What is it? You know, is it just a summary or do you want to go deep? Understanding that helps, right? I think helps them accept what you're saying better and process it better so you don't have to say it over and over again because you're just not speaking to them in a language they want to listen in. Always communicate risks up, right? That's the biggest thing. Like nobody wants to be surprised. So like don't fail silently. Be really clear about what's going on and why you think it's a problem because no one can solve a problem that nobody knows about, but chances are you can probably get ahead of something if it's on the table, right? Be very literal, like how can I help you succeed is a really nice way of framing like what is your biggest deal right now, right? What is your thing that people are like on you about that you need fixed? So yeah, once you got this down, like you can, so this is another really good book. I don't know how many people have read this one, but it's by a guy who took over like a submarine and it was like the worst performing submarine in the fleet and he made it the best performing submarine. Basically like everyone was just waiting for orders and no one had any sort of ownership or anything in their job. And he was like, why are you just waiting for me to tell you? You know what to do. Like we hired you and trained you, you know what to do, right? So tell me what you're gonna do. And so it becomes this I intend to communication instead of what should I do next? Or just sitting there passively waiting. You know, I think building that trust again, like when you get to the point where you're like, hey boss, I'm gonna do this, right? And if it's something like totally crazy, they can speak up, right? But generally, because you have that relationship, you're on the same page, right? And they just wanna know that you're doing it. So when someone's like, what is Bob doing? And you're like, oh, Bob told me he's gonna do this because the build's broken all the time and he's gonna fix it. And they're like, oh, cool, that's great. Thanks, Bob. So filling gaps. One of the big questions I ask when I interview engineering managers is like, how would you hire? And if they say, I'd hire someone like me, like I wouldn't hire them because we already have someone like you, right? We need somebody who's complimentary. And when you hire, I want you to hire complimentary people. And when people see like, my boss sucks at organization, right? Like he has all kinds of good ideas, but like he is not like a getting things done person. maybe that's a place for you to stretch and grow, right? And you can be that getting things done, and you can sort of drive that thing that your boss he might be not good at it, right? I've certainly been there before. I mean, these are, so be complimentary. These are those opportunities, like stretch and grow, right? They're right there. You don't even have to make them up. They're right in front of you. And then self-management, right? So like when you manage up, I think one of the things you need to do is make it so your manager doesn't have to manage you, right? They just want to like help you and work with you. I think like when that relationship sort of tilts to like we are collaborating versus me like feeding you work and then you coming back with output, like that sucks, right? It's not as productive. Nobody's winning, nobody's feeling good. But it requires that sort of like acknowledgement that I'm going to become my own manager, if not other people's managers right now. Yeah, and then, going back to sort of like preparing for one-on-ones, like your interactions with your manager sometimes are like really scarce and they're precious. And so everybody try to make them like the highest value possible so you can get the most out of it every time. So acknowledging that not everyone has like the awesomest manager in the world. What can you do? Find a champion, find peers. We have things like bird of feather things at our company. We have channels where people who are doing Golang work together and they come up with best practices, right? So they get to learn from each other and they get to grow but this it can be an opportunity, right? Like if your manager isn't doing the thing that they're supposed to do, like really good opportunity to step up, right? And that's where you got to double down on the company goals, right? If you know the company goals and you can hit those notes that your manager clearly isn't going to hit, like people are going to notice. No one's going to be like, oh, they're doing a good job, but I don't really care. I mean, people will notice that. And again, fall back on that leveling guide. Like look at what they're supposed to be doing, right? And either helpfully remind them or do it for them. And if that doesn't work, mentors are good, right? So there's a lot of literature on like, should your manager be your mentor? There's a weird sort of, when the rubber meets the road, I really need you to do this, and I don't care if it's what you want to do or grow at. And that's totally healthy, right? Sometimes you just need to get shit done. But mentors don't have to do that, right? Mentors can just be like, hey, cool, I'm here to help, and I don't have any investment in you like achieving this thing tomorrow. So people that have been where you are, right, or are going where you want to go, is there like a job you want to do someday and you know someone who's doing it and they're not at your company? Chances are they're probably pretty excited about talking about their job. And so just be like, hey, could you have lunch with me? I'll buy you lunch and I'm just going to ask you a bunch of questions. And generally those relationships will grow, right? If both people are interested in what the other one's talking about. And again, they can be that impartial observer. You don't have that pressure of delivery, right? You don't have that like specter of like, well, I got to get this thing done before I can get better as a person. That perspective is really helpful, especially it's nice to have a mentor in the company and outside the company, because that's a really sort of neat way to say like, the context, and so you have one answer and this other person's like, why the hell are you even doing that? And you're like, that's a good question. Why are we doing that, right? So like having those two perspectives at the same time is really cool, because that's when you can really like grow and then grow again, because you can start in separate threads being like, well, I'm going to solve the immediate problem, but I'm also going to go solve the problem of like systemically, like this is stupid. Why are we doing this? And you never really would have thought about it because you're in it, right? And it's really hard to step out of that. So that's where mentors can really help. All right. Sorry, I talked a bunch really fast. I hope it was good. I know I'm standing between everybody and lunch, so thanks for listening. I appreciate it.